It should come as no surprise whatsoever that I'm a staunch advocate of the death penalty in America. In fact, I don't think we use it nearly as often as we ought to. Whether people like it or not, there are some people who have simply given up the right to breathe the same air as decent human beings. And this can be for a fair number of different reasons, although overwhelmingly it's for the crime of murder. And I'm fine with that. Certainly you can have the death penalty for war crimes and treason, but those are very rare and therefore they're really not worth paying a lot of attention to in this current discussion. I'd even consider the death penalty for serial rapists and child molesters. Those people are scum and they need to be permanently removed from society. Now, there's a lot of people out there that think that the death penalty exists only for revenge, which is ludicrous. It exists as punishment. That's why it's a penalty. It is, at least in my opinion, the only valid punishment for severe crimes like murder. We're not killing you because we hate you. We're killing you because you've earned it. You deserve it. You brought it on yourself. And guess what, guys? It's not a deterrent. It was never intended to be a deterrent. It's a punishment for a crime that you have committed, just like every punishment out there. And I get so sick and tired of that argument that if it doesn't deter people, then we should just get rid of it. Well, you know what else doesn't deter anyone? Prison! The U.S. Bureau of Justice finds that inmates released from state prison have a 76.6% recidivism rate in just the first 5 years. That means that more than 3/4 of every single person who steps out of the state prison will end up back in prison again within 5 years. That's not a deterrent. So, by the same logic that these people use, we should just get rid of prisons, right? Yeah, that'll work. But let's be honest. While the death penalty doesn't deter anyone from committing the initial crime, it sure guarantees they will never commit another crime again. And that's effectiveness. See, I think we need to be using the death penalty a lot more than we are. I don't think there should be any such thing as life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you're never getting out, why should we keep you alive, execute you, and open up a prison cell? You're nothing but dead weight for society. Prison cells are a finite commodity. We need to make sure that anyone in a cell needs to be there. I don't want to get into my views on the criminal justice system here. That really ought to be a video on its own. But I agree that there are some crimes that shouldn't warrant imprisonment, and some that should, and we need to get rid of for-profit prisons and stop jailing people who need other kinds of help. And yeah, I know, people will whine, but what if they're innocent? Well, let's look at the reality. According to deathpenaltyinfo.org, there have been 158 people between 1971 and the present who have either been later acquitted of the charges or had the charges against them dropped. That means, on the average, over the 46 years between 1971 and present, 0.29 people per year were released from death row. It's really hard to come up with a good number for how many individual people have been on death row over those 46 years. I mean, I could come up with annual numbers, but those are all inclusive, not just individual inmates, so we'll just go with current figures. As of October 2016, there were 2,902 people on death row nationwide. And that means that, even taking all 158 released as current, that's less than 5% of the total. And considering that there have been tens of thousands of people over those 46 years, the chances of any particular inmate being factually innocent of the crime is really, really, really small. I find that it's ridiculously unrealistic to expect that humans will ever be perfect. Are we going to make mistakes? Yes, we are. It makes no sense to be quaking in our booties because we're human. You know where else we make mistakes? Putting people in prison. Does that mean we should eliminate prison? Of course not! Oh yeah, I hear people saying that we can just let people out if it turns out we made a mistake. But even if we give them money to compensate them, there's one thing we can never return: the years of their lives that have been taken away while they rotted in a prison cell. All the money in the world can't make up for that. The best you can do is learn from your mistakes, improve the system, and in a very rare case where we do execute an innocent, we compensate the family and we move on. And I really have to question just how innocent these people really are. I mean, even if they're not factually guilty of the particular crime they're in prison for, the overwhelming majority of these people are lifelong criminals with a rap sheet the length of your arm, and your leg, and probably 3 other guys. Are these really worthwhile people to begin with? Just how many of these people have never been in trouble with the law prior to their death penalty conviction? Not a whole lot, I'd wager. So I have to wonder, just how valuable to society are these people? I find it really hard to justify keeping these people around when most of them have spent more time in prison than out of it. Most of them are a drain on society. They actively work against the aims of civilized society. So honestly, what's the point? How does one rationally justify coddling criminals who really couldn't care less about the rest of us? Honestly, I think the majority of the opposition to the death penalty comes from the irrational fear of death that most people seem to have in the modern world. Well, guess what? People die. They die every day. It isn't a tragedy. It's reality. But people are terrified of dying. Therefore, they hate the idea of anybody else dying as well. And prison inmates don't want to die either. They will gladly take life in prison without the possibility of parole over death. And that just shows the emotional power of the death penalty. If only we did it right. And we don't. And we do it about as wrong as you can get. We barely do it at all, and people sit in prisons for decades before it gets done. Let's be honest, while it will probably never have any kind of deterrent effect, after all, murder's almost always done as an emotional act, not one where people think about the consequences, but if you want it to be effective, you need to execute these animals quickly. And that means once they're convicted, and once they have their mandatory appeal, we get rid of them. Not in 50 years, not in 20 years, not in 2 years, right away! March them right out of the courtroom and into the gas chamber. And for the record, I do support completely painless executions. This isn't about revenge, it's about taking out the trash. And I go with inert gas asphyxiation. Put them into an airtight chamber and fill it with nitrogen. It replaces the oxygen, the person drifts off to sleep and never wakes up. There's no pain of any kind. They go out in about 2 breaths and their death happens in under a minute. Screw those expensive and limited drug cocktails. Nitrogen is everywhere. It makes up 78% of the atmosphere. Use it. It also doesn't destroy the internal organs of these pieces of human filth. They might as well be useful for something. Harvest them and use them on people who are actually worth saving. In the end, I'm ever so sick of watching people be emotional simply for the sake of being emotional. We need to be rational. We need to have people in society who are worth having. When someone announces that they no longer want to follow society's most important laws, we have no responsibility to keep them around. And this is a purely pragmatic position. And we need to be a lot more pragmatic. Now, that doesn't mean be heartless, it doesn't mean be cruel, but we have to have a realistic view of the world and do what's best for everyone. And I just can't see how paying between $35,000 and $70,000 a year for people who will never again be functional, productive members of society through their own efforts makes any sense at all. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Just make sure that you stay rational. Emotional rants will be ignored as they should be. Let's have an intellectual discussion. That would be a nice change, wouldn't it?